history can be found anywhere, even in your own backyard. So join us as we search the land, looking for the stories that helped shape this nation. Come on the porch, grab a drink, and join us for a little bit of history from the homestead. Hey there, history buffs, and welcome to another episode of the History from the Homestead podcast. I am your host, Thomas Carroll, and joining me today is a extra special guest, former Pennsylvania Governor Mark Schweiker. Governor, welcome.
Thanks, Tom.
So today we're going to be talking about the Quecreek mine rescue, which, usually when I do the show, I'm talking to enthusiasts, history buffs, authors, but today we get the chance to talk to a key player. You were front and center for the whole thing.
Yeah, that's one way to describe it. I think we're all kind of sweating it, Tom, as far as the challenge. It's not like you go to work every day, uh, at least in the job of being the top executive of Pennsylvania state government, and think you're going to deal with a mine incident, in this case, a mine rescue. And we were fortunate and successful. But so there, there's not one handbook on how to do this well. So yeah, we were sweating a little bit.
Oh, I'm sure. And we'll get into the background briefly. That was, it started the evening of July 24th when
Yeah,
they bored into the abandoned Saxman mine, which they had thought was hundreds of feet away. Turns out was not, due to
yeah,
the maps just not being correct, which is quite common, unfortunately.
yeah. Especially in mining background, mining rich history, mining states like ours. Out the Western PA, the bituminous scene and the anthracite in the eastern part of the state. Yeah, where it's the map and the illustrations are not always the most insightful or helpful. And as Mark Popernick found, who was running point that night when they were kind of chewing away on the one edge of the mine, yeah, that was atop the surface. It was one of those typical hot, muggy July nights, weeknights, and yeah, a little chilly down below, and bam, you had tens of thousands of gallons of water pour through, and obviously threaten the lives of that mining team of 9. And for the record, the at that point they were almost a mile and a half, if not more, from the portal, which was east of there, and another set of 9 there, so to speak. There were 18 miners down below that did hustle up and get out. But the way the water rose, it cornered or trapped 9 miners.
And that's a good point to mention as well. That my grandfather was a coal miner, and you don't think about it unless you're there. It's constantly 50 some degrees, no
Yeah.
matter what. So that hypothermia obviously would be a potential problem down the road. But
Oh, well, it was
I mean,
very quickly for them, and I'm sure we'll come back to that. But
yeah,
Tom, and I too have mining family background on my mother's side, and that's to say that you always heard about, anyone that has been around that knows that it's hard scrabble stuff. It's not safe. Never really been safe. Really unsafe back in the early part of the 20th century. And that's why they used to call it, aside from temperature, that you made the point you made, that they would call it endless nights. They would go in when it was dark, and they would come out
yeah,
after it was dark, just trying to earn a living to support their family.
yeah. Oh, absolutely. Now, once the mine had flooded, and I correct me maybe if I'm wrong, but they sort of had luck on their side once the water come in because they were, if I'm not mistaken, they were mining upslope, which is
Yeah,
they because coal seams don't run flat. They up, they go down, they turn on their sides sometimes. So they luckily were mining upslope, which kept them out of the water as best as possible.
yeah,
So, but then unfortunately, then the water would flow down to the entrance and blocked their way out. And they said they called, and the other crew of 9 managed to get out. And that's where the initial response really started.
barely got out. By the way, barely
Yes,
got.
yeah,
And
I
people have to
remember.
understand too that you're not running down there.
Yeah, yeah,
That doesn't happen in a mine because the height is not there, and you're huddled over. What your listeners have to comprehend is that uh, you're you're trying to pick up speed if you're trying to beat the rising water, but you can't really stand up. You got to run somewhat hunched over, and the water's catching up to them, and they got out. And they were, they being the other 9 that got out, were greatly concerned about the
yeah,
condition and the welfare of those who got trapped. And as you pointed out, they were, dealing with an upseam. Uh, it was of partial help to the extent that, for a short time, but ultimately, each of those miners will tell you, and Randy Fogel, who was the crew chief, will tell you that the water was up to their chin and their nose when they were huddled in the cavern that kind of gave them, at least temporarily, a safe place. But ultimately, you know, I think that's why they, if they weren't spiritual and religious people before, they certainly were when they came out of that mine in this whole ordeal. Because but for the good Lord, who knows what would have happened.
yeah. And most mine incidents do not end with happy news. Usually,
That's right.
it's usually bad.
Well, Tom, if you think about it, most of the, we all know about Sego in West
Yeah,
Virginia, and all but one uh, uh, miner died, but it's usually an explosion. The
yeah,
carbon takes off, and it collapses the mine all around the miners, and often they're either crushed or asphyxiated, unfortunately, so to speak. This was an extraordinary set of events where we had a water incursion, and you know, we had a feel for that, and it was, at least for our to our way of thinking, we got a shot, so let's give it a go. But it is, we were far afield from what causes injury or death to most mining teams, which is an explosion and a
yeah,
collapse.
yeah. Now, after the initial response from to 911, when did the governor's office get involved? Was
Immediately,
it?
because in this state, and for good reason. I mean, you know, at one time we were big coal. Was a dominant industry across the state. Maybe didn't have coal mines in Philadelphia or in Pittsburgh itself, but the mining business had industrial links to the coke works in Pittsburgh, or it was being shipped out of ports near Philadelphia. So the entire state was, in an industrial sense, big coal. And so, relative to the role of state government and oversight and regulatory, it makes sense that at least in our case, current day, the Department of Environmental Protection was the unit of government with a mine safety subgroup or unit and subunit in there that pays attention to this kind of stuff. And so once the call went into Somerset County Communications Center, there's a protocol that's followed. The EMA, the 911 operation, notifies Somerset County EMA, notified Sykesville Fire Department, notify the local barracks of the Pennsylvania State Police, and they're obligated to inform the office of the governor because this state operates and then operates a 24/7 emergency operations center. So yours truly was informed almost immediately.
Wow.
But at that point, though, there had been no assessment of what the conditions were other than a mine incident. And as you mentioned a few minutes earlier, the mental leap that most make is some kind of incident or collapse. But obviously, they had hit the abandoned Saxman mine. But the next
Yeah.
day, I was headed out there.
Yeah. And once you had got there, they not a full picture, but kind of had a picture of what was going on. So, what took more of a priority at first, the drilling of the rescue hole or trying to get the water out of the mine?
No doubt, no doubt, it was sucking out the water, I call it, and kind of a first things first. Relative to develop, or drilling the rescue shaft was always uppermost in our mind. Yet at that point, it was pretty clear, based on observation at the portal, all the water that was coming out, and I'll come back to that. And the others, we had, the two gentlemen who oversaw the deep mine safety unit were experienced people with mining background themselves, Rich Stickler and Joe Spafoni. And Joe Spafoni and I are good friends to this day. But when one was on site, you saw the portal, all the amount, just the volume of water coming out there, like a overloaded garden hose. You could tell pressurized, a lot of water was coming out, and that's after traveling a mile and a half.
Yeah.
Because that's where the incident was, where they were trapped, and about 8 stories underground. And then when you got the hydrological dimension of the maps out, our worst fears were that, yeah, Saxman wasn't far, and couldn't confirm it until later. But that was because we didn't have communication with any communication with the miners until later on Thursday. So, yeah, we realized at that point, and this is where, the office of the governor comes in, the gubernatorial role, is that two reactions on my part is, we don't sit back. I don't need training on procurement and bureaucracy. Well, let's deploy. Let's get everything we need. We'll deal with the bills later. And secondly was, let's put the word out. That's why you have a 24/7 emergency operations center. Let's get to it. Let's bring in every pump we can, and deploy at different locations in order to suck out that water, because the reality is that could have led to drowning. So, and we were successful. I mean, we
Yeah.
managed to suck that water level down. So yeah, that was the number one concern, and it was well placed.
Yeah. And that's one of the first things I remember when it really started to go on the news. They kept showing the overhead shot of the pit where the mine entrance was. Uh, I was sort of familiar with how the mine was laid out, so I kind of knew how much water was there because the mine, well, not mine shack. I always called it the mine shack. Was basically underwater. That
Yeah,
was not at the level of the entrance to the mine. You couldn't see the portals anymore, and it just that was one of the first things I could remember.
yeah, and it had a long way to go.
Yeah, and I don't have the exact numbers, but if I remember correctly, it was, I think he peaked somewhere around 28 or 29,000 gallons a minute to pump the
Yep.
water out.
Yes.
That
Yeah. So I mean,
put
we and it was one of those where I think without uh, top executive involvement and interacting with these companies, to say, look, we're going to have to commandeer this equipment. We'll talk about payment later. But I to some extent, it's a reflection of, I think, the American sensitivities, the American way of life, that for 9 people, we're going to bust our butt. And even the companies are going to help. And everybody responded, and we got the equipment there because we had quite a few locations. But later, in our discussion, I know we'll probably talk about this, is that, that also becomes a real consideration and threat to their life later, because when it came time with the rescue shift to break through the top of the cavern where they were, our concern was how much water was there, because we couldn't communicate with them once we started drilling because it was just too loud. That, if you don't watch yourself, and from a air pressure equalization standpoint, you could suck all that water out, and after all that effort, they could drown that way. So probably the biggest decision of it all during that whole 80 hours or so on making logistics and deployment decisions was that moment, which was later on Saturday, so 3 days later. But anyway, but it worked. It was the way, Tom, the way I share with folks is that really they were saved 3 times. They avoided drowning, number one. When the water was, well, actually, let me start with this. And you're probably going to get to this, but we sent that 6-inch air pipe down for oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
That helped them avoid asphyxiation. And that was down there, by 4 o'clock in the morning, if my timetable memory is correct. 2, the pumps sucking out the water so they avoided drowning. And of course, 3, when we brought them up Saturday night into safety. So they avoided quite a saga, and 3 times they avoided death.
That is interesting. I never really had thought about that. That's a good way to look at it.
Well, it's a reflection on probably 250 people, directly or indirectly involved, that they gave it everything they had, in a technological sense, in a mechanical sense, in a just hard work and determination sense, and never given up on our fellow Pennsylvanians sense.
Yeah. And that brings me to the next question I was actually going to ask you. Most of the people that came, did most of them volunteer and start to just come in on their own, or was a call out sent to get?
Well, all those things. I mean, we had, certainly full-time safety professionals there. Most remember, we had the Pennsylvania State Police there, especially with mounted patrols that cordoned off the zone where all the heavy industrial work was to be. Of course, they were paid employees, but very determined, dedicated members of the Pennsylvania State Police. But generally, the drilling crews, who were really the centerpiece of what we were trying to accomplish, that was a volunteer response by Pennsylvania-based companies and some out of state. I mean, we had to get that big rig in, that had the oxygen and compressors and pumps to send it all the way down. That came from West Virginia. But yeah, I got to say the preponderance of the rescue team, which probably grew to over 200, was mostly there through motivation, self-chosen motivation, and volunteer commitment.
Yeah. And, anybody that saw the news of that too, most of those guys stayed on site the whole time. They slept there, they ate there,
no question.
No
question.
They
In fact,
stayed.
We had to be, as you would in any industrial setting, when you got an eye on worker safety, we had to kind of pay attention to who was, really putting it all out there, and you have to be careful about fatigue and losing focus, and you can get hurt. I remember I had to give he's a good old boy. He had a little bit of attitude, and he was getting, and people were getting pissed off. And they pretty much were saying to me, "Oh yeah, the gov's got to tell him to go home and get some sleep." So I walked up to him, and I had a room key. I was staying at the Ramada right there at the turnpike exit, and I told him, I said, "Look, this is for you." I said, you're starting to stink. You need a shower. And while you're there, get a shower. So anyway, he ended up getting some sleep, and we laugh about it now. But that was kind of to your point about
Yeah.
Everyone was busting it, and I mean we were working around the clock. I mean, I know I got a couple of hours of shut eye, as they call it, as opposed to real good sleep, because I mean you can't really sleep when you're dealing with this kind of challenge. And truly, really, I mean, we were successful, but through it all, you're thinking it's life and death.
Yeah, that's how to give credit where it's due for you too, Governor. You spent most of your time there, and when you weren't on site, you were out at, I think it was an old Giant Eagle doing press conferences. That was right out the road, but
Well, it all worked out too. I mean, that was, I had dealt with enough crisis, man-made, natural events, train derailments,
yeah,
tornadoes, floods, plane crashes,
yeah,
that there's no getting away from the need to communicate and share accurate information and insights. So we had to, and in fact, it kind of created a sequence each day for me, that where we would use that supermarket, that at that point abandoned supermarket, to address the media, and that was ultimately from around the entire world. Because you remember that shopping, that parking lot was full of sound trucks and radio vans and journalists. And so it was good we had that, because it wasn't far.
yeah.
And ultimately, Tom, as soon as we got up early every day, I mean, we were rolling before sunup. And what I kind of would sequence it, I would head right to the rescue site at the Arnold farm, and get briefed and be on the ground and ask the questions, ask the tough questions, and, bone up, be ready, be poised, be briefed. And then we drive up to Sipesville, the old firehouse now, because they got a new firehouse. Mm-hmm. And see the families. They were tucked away there, and no one should be surprised that they were in a really heightened emotional state. But share with them the latest, and then I'd go down to that Giant Eagle and do the news availability and talk about where we stood. And part of it was just to make sure that they didn't go anywhere near the rescue site, because we had enough logistical challenges up there with personnel, because it's kind of a tight area if you look at it these days. Mm-hmm. From the highway, that we couldn't handle reporters moving in and out and slowing us up. And then I would brief them. So it's kind of like a cycle.
Interesting. And I probably shouldn't have done it, but I was still a teenager at the time, and I would drive into Somerset to see all the news vans and the crews and everything standing up there, because little old Somerset County, other than this and the crash of Flight 93, not much happens here. It's all pretty laid back. So I do remember all the news from, like you said, all over the world.
Yeah, we ended up we received in Harrisburg at the governor's office tens of thousands of communications, because it had become a worldwide story. And unfortunately, as you've already acknowledged, and we were fortunate in Somerset County that usually, these kinds of incidents end in a lot of death.
Yeah.
So we made history in that it's really was the one and only time in the history of American mining that all trapped miners were found and brought up alive.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, it's the only other one I can think of is down in Chile.
Yeah,
And that was truncated by Center Rock, which is just over in Berlin. It basically
that's
said we
right.
have a drill bit that can do it faster than what you say it
Yeah,
can take. But
yeah, we came to know those things, and I mean, yeah, that which brings up the first, the what I call the air shaft, where
yeah,
to inject the oxygen. We were that was a small bit and a 6-inch air pipe, and we went down there in a matter of hours.
right.
And this is an interesting and not a tangential topic, but we hit it spot on. In fact, one of the miners said, "You almost knocked my helmet off," and that's how close we were. And I bring that up because your listeners would probably really find this fascinating. You know, there isn't any equipment or technology that can tell you where human beings are 8 stories,
Uh,
you know, underneath the ground.
yeah,
And so you got to use human instinct and wits and intuition, and combined with technology, or combined with smarts. For example, Joe Spifoni and Rich Stickler, I remember them laying out the maps in terms of the hydrology down below, and the geoformations and the undulations. And the whole idea was we knew where they were working when the water crashed through. And then we had to figure out where would they flee, where could they go safely, and I say this ever so gently, what would mice do? They look for high ground.
yeah,
And these smart people, led by Randy Fogel, I mean, that's where they earn their living. Some people work in a steel mill, some people work in a supermarket, some people work at the farm. Well, they work underneath, and they had a sense of where some high ground was, and that's where they went. And uh, they managed to maintain or subsist because that's where they were. Well, that's what they were inclined to do. We come along 5 hours later, 6 hours later, we have to figure out or surmise where they would end up. And then you have to then you take that surmisal and you get the latitude and longitude of that spot down below. Then you got to find a corresponding spot atop the surface, the same latitude and longitude, and then hope you hit it. And we hit it spot on. And we had, uh, and really we did not have conversation with them because
right.
there wasn't a communications device. And they tapped on the pipe 9 times, which is, we had to be real quiet, which was miners code for we got 9 people down here. Mm-hmm. And that's all we needed, to really pick up the pace, as far as the rescue effort and deploying equipment and machinery. But we couldn't tell them anything because when you turn on that compressor truck platform and you start to send down that heated air, and parenthetically, that heated air is like 350 degrees. When it comes out at the down below where they're huddled, it sounds like you're a couple hundred yards behind a 747 at an airport. That's how loud it is. You can't sit there. It's truly ear splitting.
Yeah.
But that oxygen rich heated air allowed them to maintain themselves and create kind of a figurative life-saving bubble around them. It held back the water. And it was warmer. It was never warm. And until we could get to them, like some 70 hours later.
Yeah. Which, that brings the small drill. I guess we should talk about the big drill, which was it 30? Was it a 30-inch drill? Was it a 30-inch?
I think it's bigger than that. No, it's bigger. It was bigger than that. I don't remember.
Bigger. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember now. But anyway, it's big enough for the rescue capsule to go through,
Yeah,
which took a lot longer to drill due to its size and the unfortunate setbacks. So when it actually broke in the first shaft, when they broke the
yeah,
bit,
yeah. That was Tom. That was the tough one. That was the toughest,
I bet.
lowest moment of it all, because not only did we discovered that a little bit late in the game. That the bit wasn't turning and churning up the soil down below. The cable had broken atop the drill bit, and so we had to start a second shaft. But it was not easy to go return to the families, because we were trying to give them straight talk
Yeah.
the whole time, and use straight talk to say we had to stop drilling and we got to start a second rescue shaft. You can imagine their reaction and sense of despondency that this isn't going well. So and so that's part of the job, so to speak. And but then we came back online, and we really made good headway with that second shaft. But ultimately, we got that baby back online. Because of that tool shop up in Punxsutawney, that gave us that new bit, and man, we flew with
You
that
know,
thing.
I was going to mention because you had to build a tool to retrieve what was left, the
Yeah,
broken part of the bit. It
yeah,
would have typically taken like 3 days, and they
yeah.
built it in a matter of hours.
That's right. They call it an overshot.
Okay.
It's like if you imagine this pen I'm holding is like a soda bottle, and when you have the cap off it, it's got you can see the top of the bottle, and then the overshot kind of screws onto it, and you can pull it up and
Yeah.
out. It goes over top, and it allows you to secure and retrieve it and bring it up. And that's what we meant. Yes, they did. That's a true story.
Yeah.
And this is kind of under the heading of what all hands on deck, and what a governor's got to accomplish is we're not going to miss a minute here. And I wasn't being flippant, but I said that send the National Guard helicopter up there and let it sit outside until that baby's ready to go, and airlift it down. And this is not BS. That thing was still hot when it got to
Wow.
the Arnold property.
Wow. That's what we can do as Americans when it needs done, for
Absolutely.
lack of a better way to put it, when the chips are down.
Yep. And you can imagine those folks up in the tool and die shop. I'm sure they've had pressing schedules. But did they ever think, when they got a phone call, that hey, you're going to be directly involved in helping us make good on sending that rescue capsule down? You're going to have to produce this baby in record time, and they did.
And it worked because you pulled the bit out and got back to drilling on the first shaft, which and the whole time you had no communication with the miners below
No,
at all,
no. Well,
no
once
idea.
we will think about it, it depends how you define communication. In a classic
No.
sense, talking live or over a device, no, we had absolutely, when they went to work on Wednesday, they didn't hear anything from humanity or from the rescue team or our crew until Saturday around 8 p.m. I'm probably wrong on that time, but it was 3 days.
Yeah. Yeah.
That would make sense, because this all went about 80 hours. They didn't hear from anybody for almost 72 hours.
Right. Right. And there, as far as the drilling too, you had to stop the drilling short to make sure first that you weren't going to punch through and collapse that air bubble
That's
and
right.
have the water. So there was kind of a magic number that the water level needed to be at before you drilled
Yeah,
through.
good memory. That is, and I would tell you, Tom, that was probably the toughest decision of it all, and one of the tougher decisions in my life. Uh, due to the fact that I'm the even before I became governor, I was the top executive responder in emergency management, and so those kinds of essential decisions rise to the top. And yeah, it was. We have to make a judgment on when uh, that we think the water level in the cavern where they were and overall in the mine was down enough that when we popped through the top of the cavern, we didn't suck all the water that was there out and perhaps introduce the threat of drowning right then and there to all of them after all that effort.
Yeah.
Uh, and so, yeah, that was, and that was my responsibility. I was the
Yeah.
accountable one, and we were fortunate, and we had some really solid, uh, you know, smart people with me, uh, and we guessed right. And I say that's to some extent, I had to. It's not meant to sound like Boy Scout talk, but I would often say that the chief engineer was the good Lord upstairs.
Yeah. Now, I I promise not to ask any burning questions, but I'm going to ask one, and it's a good one. You broke through. You found out all nine were alive. How
Yeah,
did that feel?
incredible, exhilarating. Um, just Kathy and I often talk. We got some a grandchild, and the births of our kids are always carry special memories. But it was like the rebirth of the nine miners. So really, just a fantastic feeling. And as I said, whoo, looks like we're going to get them up.
Yep.
And we proceeded to set the stage to bring them up. But I can remember, I'll always remember the gentleman who was working the listening device. We were somewhat removed at the crest of the hill in a SUV, which was our on-site op center, and there was like a depression in the Arnold farm there near this entrance road, and I had whispered to him, everyone's watching, and walk down there discreetly and drop that eavesdropping wire and device down the air pipe. The miners themselves, the trap miners themselves, had some feel that we're getting ready because we had turned off the compressor truck because we had to get rid of that whistling sound down below, um, and send it down. And to your question about when you come to know what's occurred or not occur, really the moment between true rescue of nine individuals who are alive, or that it's going to be, a recovery, which we didn't want to ponder, is that moment. And so he was on his knees and he was listening intently for about, I'd say 20, 30, 40 seconds. And actually, it led to a pretty funny moment down below, but he sends it down, and we are watching, and we are watching intently. And he's on one knee, and all of a sudden he gives the thumbs up, and then he does it 9 times.
Nice.
And we're like, we're going to do this. And so one of them, he But we laugh now, but he turned, he said, "Are you the miners?" And one of the miners down below said, "Who the hell you think it is?" Um, and uh, one of the other miners turned to the other eight and he said, "Oh, this is not good. They don't even know we're down here." Anyway,
um,
I'm making light, but yeah, that was the first contact in over 70 hours. And, you know, we reassured them, and, their response was, "Yeah, well, that's great. We're ready to come up." And, the first things they asked for were, you know, something to eat and some chew. And you got any beer? Send that down. I said, "Well, we can't send beer down, but we'll get you what you need." So anyway, what a moment. Yeah. Triumphant moment.
yeah, I think that would probably be my biggest memory was when you made the announcement on TV, because I can picture you wearing just a button up blue shirt and everything, and
Yeah.
held your hands aloft like a undefeated champ boxer or whatever
Well,
that they were still
at
alive.
that point, I can tell you it was strictly running on adrenaline and instinct that, we had really kind of, you know, trudged along the emotional bottom for 75 hours.
Yeah,
And in of itself, uh, and you remember the media at times was pressing on whether or not they were goners, and was it going to be a recovery? And that got old as the one standing there answering questions and behind the microphone. But so it was nice to be there, and and I was in my mind communicating to the families in the fire hall, and all the loved ones in Somerset County and the region, that they're alive and they're coming up. So after 75 hours of angst and pessimism.
yeah. And I guess we'll just say we'll remember the first one come up. I can remember when the first one come up because I
Yeah,
watched it live on TV. I remember when they brought
yeah,
Vogel up because he was having chest pains,
yeah,
and then you brought him up by basically weight from biggest to smallest because
yeah,
remember that capsule was only I want to say 28 inches around,
yeah. It's about right.
and you had to lift the door up and kind of wiggle inside.
Yes,
It was a small, which I believe it's still out at Quecreek now in the little museum there. So if
yeah,
anybody
it
would
is.
want to go see it, it's not big, and to wiggle in that, I couldn't imagine even that having that trip through the dark in that little cage on the end of a cable from the crane
Yeah,
for
and not and,
240
and not get
feet.
and not get snagged.
Yeah, which that I just remembered something as well with the hole that was drilled. It actually had you about halfway down had drilled a little bit smaller because of the broken bit.
Yeah.
And so to guess and get it down and not get snagged, which
Oh, it
is
it,
I
it it
mean,
is. I don't think it's hard to suggest, aside from our technological and mechanical smarts, that it's divine providence, kind of running side saddle with you, and in order to get all the way down there, 8 stories down. So in my mind, and wet the whole
yeah,
way. So and then yeah, they pretty much had to shove Randy in there. And he was the crew chief, so he didn't really want to go up first, but he really, they weren't going to let him. And then it kind of right on through to Mark, Mo, was the smallest guy, who ironically, if you think about it, and I do because we all lived and endured this challenge and ordeal, is he was really the first to be affected because he was running point down below when it cracked through to the Saxman mine.
Yeah, yeah. Now, after the rescue and everything, have you remained friends with the miners?
Yeah,
After.
yeah, um, yeah. I mean, just out there not too long ago, and uh, we were up at the Jennerstown Speedway, had some fun there. It's not easy. It's easy for us to have fun because we were brought together through difficulty and you know uh, turmoil and life-threatening circumstances.
Yeah,
So it was fun. We had a lot of laughs, and it's we're all obviously older now because it's you're talking something that happened 22 years ago, and
yeah,
they have kids and grandkids, um, and it delightful because it was a nice night. Um, we were guests. We had some good racing. We had a little spot to ourselves. We probably had a little couple brews along the way, and just a good night, a good Saturday night. I mean, we had other things we did because we do have dinner together, and just to stay up with them, and these are fine people, in my estimation. And if your listeners think it through, we didn't know each other.
no,
I mean, they were down below. They really didn't. They only came to know what occurred operationally, and then my particular role in it after, after they got out of the hospital a couple of days later, and after observation. And really, it took a couple of months for them to even kind of be inclined to read about it because they almost died. It's not like any of us would want to go back and revisit a log or a chronology that lays out all that happened. And then, but we did get together almost a year later, just the nine of them, and Bill Arnold, so to speak, where the rescue operation took
yeah,
place up the mine, and myself, and to make the point about what we discussed, and we really didn't know each other, or get to know each other. I remember, and that was also in Jennerstown, and I remember Randy said to me after we had something to eat, and again we had a couple of beers, which is always easy going, and he said, "Well, the boys would like to know why you did it." Quote. And my response was, "That's my job, Randy. I'm the I'm the top exec. If the governor can't help run a rescue offense, who's supposed to run it? That's maybe the Constitution doesn't say handle mine rescues, but that's the job." And so I wasn't going anywhere. And we had some heartfelt questions because they almost died. I mean,
yeah,
it's kind of a heavy experience, and for any of us. And but I worked in a steel mill 2 summers. That's how I got money together to go to college and the whole bit. And I remember, somebody getting hit by a rail car and died on the job, and the ambulance had to show up and take him away. I was a young guy; I wasn't even 20 years old. Um, but everybody in that shift team was there, to help, uh, you know, in any way they could, given that workplace accident and death. They didn't go anywhere. It was one of their own. For me, it was one of our own Pennsylvanians. You gotta help effect a rescue. And that's what I told them.
hmm. And you did so beautifully. Uh, you ran the show exceptionally well.
Thanks.
You were with grace and dignity the entire time. That's one of the other memories is how well it was handled, and which I'm going to say that contributed a ton to the success as well, I'm sure.
Well, no single person can, orchestrate all that. You need, we all need a team. We all need supportive teammates. And, if anything, aside from the particulars that we've just gone over in the last hour or so, we had super motivated, dedicated, knowledgeable people who came in and no one was giving up. No one was throwing in the towel. No one was going home. Then you combine that with, the grit and never give up determination of the 9 miners below. We created the equation for a successful rescue. So for me, it's a compelling example of the might of human nature when we rally together. In my mind, it was exemplary of the Pennsylvania rally spirit. So we managed to succeed.
And that is a perfect bookend for why I like to do the show, because history is full of those human stories. And
So
that's what
true.
I like about it. You dig in deep enough and get the human stories. And for me, reading a history book is more interesting than any fiction book out there, because truth is stranger than fiction sometimes.
Well, you think about this, and not to sound too deep or spiritual, but less than a year before, a lot of my first team folks in emergency response uh, were out there. And I can remember talking to the county coroner who did a super job during the challenges of Flight 93. But, we lost everybody. That was, 40 people who fell victim to those American hating terrorists on United Flight 93. And if you would have asked me uh, or suggested that we'd be back in Somerset County, just a short distance from Shanksville, uh, dealing with a similar, a crisis, not a plane crash, but in this case, a mine water incursion. I would have said you're crazy. But the beauty of how the the uh, the book was balanced, so to speak. One day in September on 9/11, we lost everybody, but then less than a year later, we managed to rescue everyone. So it kind of righted the emotional ledger for us, and we all needed that. I think the country was excited and motivated by not just Pennsylvania about what we accomplished. So, that was all good for us in a spiritual sense as well.
Yeah, and I remember that the friends and families of the Flight 93 victims had actually, reached out to the community, to the families of the miners and everything, and messages of solidarity and such. I remember that as well.
But that was on Saturday, yeah, and that was under the heading of timely and uplifting. That and I still talk to Gordon Feld, who is the president of the families of Flight 93, whose brother was killed on 93. To this day, but yeah, that they were so thoughtful and interested and remembered the outpouring of practical and emotional support that Somerset County residents furnished them the year before, that they would find the time to send us the message of keep the faith, we're at it, let's hope it goes well today. And we managed to succeed. So yeah, there are a lot of, as you've mentioned, Tom, in these kinds of direct conversations, we all learn a lot about each other. But they didn't have to do that, and they did, and really lent us a helping emotional hand for sure.
Yeah. So, before we close out, Governor,
Sure.
I just have to ask, what's next for you?
Well, I'm going to go home and eat dinner tonight. Uh, I'm just being playful. I still, I still have the interest and the propensity to emergency response. I'm an executive in residence in Homeland Security at a university. So, I still pay very close attention to what we have to do for, the nation's security in Pennsylvania. When you live as I did, uh, as we all experienced, although a little more confrontationally, as I was the chair of the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Council the entire time in life in Harrisburg, that one does not forget what happened on 9/11. So I still I still am on the job. We have to be careful about, I think the Chinese communists are a threat. And as an example, and we got to be on top of our national security game. So I still pay attention to Homeland Security matters. Still, with for example, I think the state, we got to be thinking about launching a well endowed second urban search and rescue team. Because we're a big place and a lot of residents, and we need that kind of capacity for both, the entire state, all of our 67 counties. But in terms of public life, office holding, no, those days are behind me. I had a good run, but my wife and I are got a blessed with a good family, and helping to raise some grandkids and all those things.
That's great. So, Governor, sir, I thank you so much for talking to me today. I hope I didn't keep you too long.
No, Tom, I appreciate your interest. And, my dad used to talk about, the hand me down at the dinner table. And he wasn't talking about clothing. He was talking about, there are, everyone thinks the only stuff that counts these days are on CNN. And while they do important work, I think in our own community, in our own regions, there's plenty of legends and folklore that ought to be handed down, and this is one of them. And but for the motivated, talented nature of Pennsylvanians, who knows what would have happened in that summer of 2002. So I think we were blessed to have those kinds of folks from all around the region, particularly good Somerset County residents who made this happen. And that's worth discussing at the dinner table or in podcasts like this for sure.
Yes. So, um, actually, there is something I think we should do as well before we do officially close out, because we did lose Dennis Hall recently. So, I feel we should dedicate this to his memory, because we're unfortunately down to only 8 miners now. So,
well, thank you, Tom. And two reactions as we conclude is that Dennis was really the gentleman who picked up the phone, because they were still wired, to the other members of the team, and said, "Get out, the water's coming." Because the water just knocked the phone out of his hand. They had to hustle and get going to reach that cavern where they huddled. And so he had a big, I think, role to play in alerting the other 8 miners. Certainly Mark knew about it because he was close to Mark Popernick. But yeah, and I can tell you, I got a beautiful hunting knife. Dennis had a avocation, as his wife would tell you. He made fine hunting knives. I am talking we can all go to Cabarrus, and Cabarrus got some nice stuff when it comes to outdoors equipment for hunting and so on. But this is a beautiful piece of equipment, and I still have that.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, and Dennis gifted that to me. So I appreciate the opportunity to reflect on our man Dennis
Yeah.
as well.
And again, Governor, I thank you so much for doing this today.
My pleasure. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks to everybody for listening. Remember, if you like the show, you can share it with all your friends. We can be found on all the major podcast players. We can be found on Facebook. And you can also find us and catch the show notes at historyfromthehomestead.com.